Well, it looks like one team is prepared to make their drivers a little bit upset. McLaren's when, not if declaration on team orders, it's landed like a hand grenade, meaning that either Oscar or Lando is definitely going to have to take one for the team. There's no bones about it now. In other words, McLaren's leadership isn't asking if tough calls will be needed between their two drivers, but when those calls will come. We nearly saw it play out in Melbourne, if not for Oscar's brief off-track moment. Now, I'm not talking about the moment he got on the grass, I'm talking about that moment he went over some gravel and lost a couple of seconds, yeah, because it was very, very close. Zach actually on an interview going, phew, that was close, and then they could go racing again. Zach, are you sure you really should have said that out loud? What I'm trying to get at here is just keep an eye on this weekend's sprint. No holds barred, no team orders, and there are no strategy calls at play. It's going to be an all McLaren front row. And team principal Andrea Stella's stance has immediate and intriguing ramifications for the balance of power within the team. This not being the first time he has been frank about such matters. He has actually gone on record to say that the team does come first. This has been the case for a good couple of years. I also remember the quotes that he was talking around in Baku, which I will get into in a moment. But the fact that we're being reminded of this right now, at a time when the balance of power might be starting to tilt one way more than the other, especially since the other driver has taken over the lead in the championship, all of this could be, in a way, McLaren passing the buck when it comes to them being responsible for what's going on track, and instead it's the way that the media perceives this and the drivers themselves and how they go about racing. Does come off the back of some real big clangers this year which people hoped would have been just consigned to 2024. Japan, McLaren were openly criticised for playing it safe despite arguably having the faster car. He later defended Stella the decision, insisting it wasn't clear that Oscar was really quicker than Lando at the time, and explaining that Norris was yo-yoing within a second of Verstappen to manage his tyres in dirty air. Which, to be fair, does make sense since Piastri and others have quoted that this year, more than ever, you have to be really good at qualifying or else you're really not going to make much progress unless there are accidents, pit stop blunders, safety cars. You're going to have to rely on outside influences rather than you just being able to press on the loud pedal and overtake an actual car. And Piastri, for his part, and for some credit, he actually has taken this on the chin and accepted what the team has told him. That is for now. But nevertheless, speaking as a McLaren fan, it really brought back bad memories of last year when it seemed like almost every race weekend there was some kind of dropping of the ball. I remember Silverstone. That should have been a 1-2 in those interchangeable conditions, and yet it wasn't. I was fearing we would have seen more of the same, that McLaren hadn't learnt a damn thing over the winter. However, you can be assured that maybe we will not see as much of that paralysis on the pit wall this year. I mean, we might see some, but not all the time. And by admitting one driver will eventually be aggrieved, McLaren signals a readiness to enforce team orders. The kid gloves are off here. And I think that will really test the, at the moment, cordial relationship between Norris and Piastri, because say what you will about what they get up to on track, they do get on as people, but that could easily change. So here is Stella's comment right here for your consideration. Ahem. I can't exclude that team orders may happen. There are advantages to having two extremely competitive drivers, and I think the advantage in the long term is dominant, and that is what you want in my view. But there could be episodically some situations which may leave one of the two drivers a little upset because the team made a decision, or because of how the race unfolded, so we are very, very aware of this. Internally, we don't talk about if this happens, we talk about when this happens, because we are aware it is a very difficult business. We are aware as a team, and Lando and Oscar are aware as well. So he's basically saying, we all know this, now you know this, so don't come after us if it happens. And very much that McLaren are still team first. Such admissions can upset the delicate hierarchy and egos within a team. It's a shift from last year's subtle pecking order when Norris was still seen as McLaren's main man, and Piastri the support act should Lando had faltered. And Stella reflected this, saying in September that, with Norris in contention for the title, he was still their best bet, but at the same time, saying the constructors was a priority too. Let's be real, no matter what happens with Lando or Oscar, McLaren want that constructors title badly. They were striving for it last year, after not thinking they had a chance at the beginning of the year with Red Bull dominating. They've now done it, the first since 1998, they now want the double. That they've not had since I was barely in preschool. And the message was clear last year that despite papaya rules existing, Lando was still the guy who had the control of the team. Despite Oscar showing last year he had gotten on top of tyre management that he was really struggling with in his rookie year, but then he was also dealing with his qualifying inconsistencies, which arguably cost him points. So with Stella saying this, it's the loudest foghorn yet in telling both of them, than the world, that no driver is sacred if the team needs to make a tough call. Instead, the situation will ebb and flow over the course of the year, and this will impact Norris, since he might naturally have assumed a degree of primacy due to his seniority and long service. Andrea Stella, he will still not coddle egos. Him saying not that long ago that if you clearly can't subscribe to the idea of McLaren being the team and your main focus, then you don't belong here. And McLaren, right now, they're in the case of just saying to their drivers, sorry, not sorry, because they're in a really good place right now. Both of their drivers are in the top 2. They're leading the constructors by a considerable amount after just 5 rounds. They can afford to be a little bit punchy with their drivers, saying, well, we come first, and what you do cannot compromise that, okay? And while Stella has admitted that it might lead to some situations where things get a little bit messy, this is still a problem that McLaren would rather have than have nothing in terms of competitiveness at all, and 2 drivers who are young and very feisty have nothing to work with, and therefore they are wasting their very, very formative and very important good years. And in a way, having 2 good drivers who are very close in skill and potential, you could argue that Mercedes have that as well, with Antonelli really kicking on and proving his worth already. And because McLaren's expectation has been made public, any clash on the circuit could be seen as a calculated consequence of McLaren going all in terms of winning both titles, rather than them mismanaging the situation, which is exactly what the team was constantly hounded for last year. And I don't think you need me to tell you that I, amongst many others, were quick to criticise McLaren about how they handled things, that they were incompetent, and that McLaren was screwing over so-and-so driver. It could be Lando or Oscar, take your pick. Well, clearly, Andrea has taken that to heart and very, very personally, and said, hey, you know what? We're telling you like it is right now, so if you get butthurt about it, that's on you. We told you so months ago. So okay, what does that mean in practice then, Law? Well, let's say that we hear a radio call ordering one driver to swap positions. The team can point back to their previous telegraphing and basically say, well, this is what happened, we said so, it happens in racing, and move on. Quite honestly, it's quite savvy and it's very shrewd. It's defining expectations before anything major is gone down, and right in time too, for the Miami Grand Prix, when I do think both men are really in contention for winning, and it could be very, very close, that we may see contact or heated radio exchanges from both parties. And arguably, this kind of expectation setting, this was not what Ferrari were doing, so McLaren here, they have the upper hand in that regard as well. Rather than denying any intra-team rivalry and then looking two-faced if team orders are later imposed, McLaren is owning up to the reality. They're here to win, and they won't take sides if it means compromising the better driver on the day. In all of this, Andrea is basically saying, hey, don't be shocked if we pull this kind of stunt on you and the drivers. Be more shocked when we don't do that, i.e., when they dither. Okay, I will openly admit that is sounding like a team that wants to win. A team that knows how to get championships. That is much more like it. It's quite gutsy, cutthroat. It's a bit out of character for my taste, but you know, that's just the way it goes. It's clear to see that last year's team triumph has relit the fire under them that they haven't really seen since the late 2000s when Lewis was around, and Fernando. The team are well aware that both titles are theirs for the taking, and they're not going to let it slip away due to either dithering or playing nice and not wanting to hurt their drivers' fifis. Because that's exactly what we saw in 2007 when Fernando and Lewis were duking it out, and then Kimi Raikkonen just slipped out underneath of them and basically went, oh, look at that, guys. I won the championship. Isn't that great? I know. Now go for a drink. But I really just don't want what happened at the Japanese Grand Prix to happen again, because it was the basis of one of my recent videos that if they decide to be too passive, you are going to be getting Lando or Oscar or both exerting their own true natures on the team, and therefore they will collide because they both have different goals. But if they can just say to both drivers and the world saying like, look, this will happen just so you know, that might temper it. Because yes, the psychological fallout of Stella's stance could be cut in different ways for Lando versus Oscar, given where each of them stands right now. For Lando, Stella's proclamation might feel like a chilly gust of reality. Yet another reminder that he has lost some control of the team that he has held dear since 2017. And the British driver, he's been really candid about how he feels about the situation. Him doing his best not to blame the team specifically, but more like blaming himself for not making the most of it. I do appreciate this candidness, but there are people out there who don't appreciate that candidness and in fact openly chastise it. Norris admits that he's not as on it in 2025, struggling to connect with the new car. Instead of relying on his natural talent, he's thinking his way through every corner, and it's showing. In short, he is overthinking things, and then that leads to him overdriving. Honestly, I'm okay with him being open about stuff, it does make him human. But former champions like Alan Jones recently labelled Norris as a weak person for airing such doubts and suggesting that all this nonsense in the media means that he's ripe for the picking by his teammate. I'm holding the phone of doubt here because remember, Alan Jones is the 1980 F1 champion from Australia, the last person to have done so, and now speaking probably up in the defense of Oscar, who may be the one to succeed him. I think that would be understandable that he'd be trying to do Lando down. So yeah, just be cautious with that, but it was said by a former champion, so that has to have some credit given because, you know, he was in the mix of it. But even then, it's overly harsh. And then you get his own team principal effectively saying that we won't protect you if it's not in the team's best interests. For a driver already admitting that he's not entirely at one with the car, this could feel like yet another vote of no confidence. A sign from the management that if Lando can't really get on top of this car before the technical directors of the Spanish Grand Prix potentially mix up the order, then they might completely drop Lando in favour of the other guy. Because seriously, that flexi-wing thing could easily change the pecking order and mean McLaren's comfortable lead isn't so comfortable anymore. And that therefore can't be comfortable for Lando's psyche. And then on the other hand, Oscar seems to be unfazed by this all, but mind you, he doesn't really seem to be fazed about anything, honestly. But this? Stella's stance? Oh, this plays into his hands, absolutely. Oscar's shown a remarkably calm and pragmatic approach in only his third F1 season, belying his age and relative inexperience. I liken this to where Kimi Räikkönen was in 2003, his own third season of competition, when he had the best chance to take down Michael Schumacher, a titan, and he almost did it. Well, I mean, had his McLaren been a little bit more reliable, and the fact that the MP4-18 was basically dead on arrival and they had to rely on the MP4-17D of 2002, it was still pretty competitive, but ideally, they needed that 18 to work, and that was one of Adrian Newey's biggest blunders. And as I and many have said, Lando Norris likes to wear his heart on his sleeve. He is open with people, he is honest, and honesty sometimes is the best policy. But in the case of Oscar, he doesn't use that philosophy, and instead keeps his cards close to his chest. Even when you could argue he felt hard done by, like in Suzuka, whilst he felt like he could have had a try at Max, he accepted the word of the pit wall ultimately, and that qualifying was more important than ever. No public frustration, no cryptic radio barbs, just going, I'll be better next time. And that temperament is really starting to gain in more and more fans across the world, that it's not going unnoticed, and you're getting Max Verstappen yet again praising his efforts, singing from the rooftops that this Oscar is the real deal. Because after what happened in Jeddah with the time penalty, you would have expected Max to be angry at Oscar, but he was not. He was more angry with the FIA, as I and many others have made clear. He had nothing against Piastri. He was saying that Oscar showed that he had what it took to win a title. And he also rated Mark Webber's presence alongside Oscar as well. Now that last point is mega. Webber, Piastri's manager, has seen it all. Triumph, disappointment, and the political wars that erupt when teammates fight for glory. One can easily imagine that since becoming Oscar's manager, he has told him absolutely constantly about the pitfalls of internal team politics, which Mark had to deal with for upwards of 4 seasons, 2010 to 2013. If anyone knows the signs that maybe a team is starting to favour one driver over the other, then it's Mark. As a result, Mark has almost certainly impressed on Oscar the importance of doing his talking on the track and staying cool under pressure. If he has any issues, talk about it in private. I think you can objectively see that so far, it's working. He's doing the talking on the track. 3 wins out of 5 so far at the time of this recording, a 10-point lead in the championship, which so far is pretty decent, and also probably having to look at his trophy cabinet and going like, yeah, probably get a bigger one, mate. In short, what Oscar is doing right now, this early on in the season, is making it clear to his team and the world he is a title bet. But as I have alluded to earlier, a mid-season, or a kind of third season pivot could easily topple things, and that might be a finishing line for both Oscar and Lando, that whoever is in charge of the championship, be it Lando or Oscar, will get that little bit more priority going into the second and third acts of the season. Because the FIA's TD18 technical directive being clamped down even more for Spain on flexible front wings, which was first introduced back in Singapore of 23, if I remember correctly, teams must now cut front wing flex by a third. A change with real performance implications. We kind of got a taster of this when they reduced the flexibility of the rear wings not that long ago, notably around about Suzuka in China. But at the same time, this comes around at a time when McLaren have been really under the microscope when it comes to flexible wings, which really sparked off with the whole mini DRS thing of Baku, and then that having to be nerfed completely, almost into practical non-existence, and therefore you would have thought that their performance would have been compromised, but indeed it wasn't. Not really. But despite this though, I don't think McLaren will be sitting pretty on this, because McLaren may no longer enjoy the luxury of a pace advantage in every race. Alternatively, it may not affect them at all, because Zak Brown, I recall, dismissed concerns over the mini DRS clampdown, hinting that McLaren had other unseen innovations than just a front wing, suggesting that it might have been a deliberate red herring. But if that cushion gets thinner and thinner and thinner and far less comfortable, then expect every decision taken by the drivers and the team to matter more. The team might become more ruthless in ensuring the right McLaren finishes ahead of the other one every weekend. This could be the moment when Stella's when not if promise truly gets put into action. McLaren would have a strong incentive to throw their full weight behind the calm Aussie should he remain in charge of the championship, banking on him to deliver the driver's title, now that the regulations, hopefully, would remain constant. Conversely, if Norris reclaims the upper hand, Stella's philosophy ensures that Piastri would be expected to play ball for the team's sake, and that the drivers would be expected to respect the pit wall. You could easily argue that what Stella is saying right now is effectively them, McLaren, resetting the pecking order, that, yeah, Lando may no longer be the team leader, but he's not the team number 2 either. That it's up to what happens on the track to try and figure out where is McLaren going to go in the short to medium term future. But for Norris, it still really begs a sobering question. Is it too late to take back control of the team that he thought he had control of for many years? Is the prospect of him potentially being the de facto number 2 driver a reality, a genuine prospect? And it does make you wonder that if Lando had been the one to win 3 races out of 5, people would have just taken it as read, as in like, oh, okay, Lando's kicked on, it's still his team, let's get on with it. There wouldn't really have been much debate, this would have been the status quo. But the reality is this. That didn't happen. Piastri's victories and ice-cool consistency have ensured that Norris cannot comfortably claim number 1 status unless he can reset and rely on his natural gift. Indeed, you could argue that the balance of power shifted so much that you see Zak Brown being jubilant with Oscar's wins as much as Lando's. You're seeing more instances of Oscar being celebrated by having his ribs cracked by a bear hug. That was Lando back in the day. I bet Lando's just rubbing his ribs and just going like, I could have that. Why am I not having that? Yeah, it's a big cultural change for the guy. Because right now, McLaren is no longer Lando's team. It's a 2-champion outfit. Stella's comments acknowledge that shift. By openly preparing to upset either driver if necessary, Stella is removing any lingering notion that Norris has protected status. So therefore, Norris really has to take that claim back. He has to prove himself on the track, reset his mind, refocus, change the way he goes about racing to earn that number 1 status again, or at least just get everything on an even keel. So you could easily argue that in a way, this is not only just a warning to their drivers, but also extra motivation for both of them. There is an argument to be made that this very public challenge from Stella could light a fire under Norris. Great drivers often respond to pressure by elevating their game. Norris knows exactly where he stands now too. There's no sugarcoating. His team boss has essentially said, perform or prepare to be sacrificed. This could be the jolt that Lando has desperately needed, a reminder, a wake-up call. And as we have seen from many drivers, including the likes of Yuki Tsunoda, if you get a wake-up call, that can easily change the trajectory of your future career in F1. You could easily argue that dive bomb of Bahrain 2024, had that not happened, may never have resulted in Yuki Tsunoda getting the promotion. This is now a case here for Lando. If he can actually wake up from this, rise above the criticism, the online hate, and really prove it on track, then this could easily turn things around. May I remind you that at times last year, he really did give Max a run for his money and really put the Dutchman on the ragged edge to the point where he did lose his cool, and he too got criticism from the media. And this McLaren MCL39, it's a car where he has the possibility to re-click with it after saying that he just couldn't click with it. We saw this in pre-season testing, and there is a sweet spot to be had here because Piastri is already proving that. So there's an even chance that if he can find that sweet spot for himself, then his raw talent can then rise above him having to overthink, and therefore he won't be overdriving the car. He'll be driving exactly where he needs to be to maximise his potential. Look, the season is still young enough for momentum to swing. A strong result at the upcoming races could rebuild his confidence. If he can arrive at the Spanish Grand Prix having taken back the championship lead, thanks to clean racing, and maybe a little bit misfortune from Oscar's side, McLaren's internal tone may shift back toward him, because this means that Stella's when not if comment would apply to Lando as much as it would apply to Oscar, that Norris would be once again back in the ascendancy when he won his first Grand Prix and then proceeded to win 3 more that year. It therefore does mean that McLaren is remaining neutral and they are absolving themselves of any criticism. But conversely, if this does not translate into anything for Lando and we just see more of the same, then this could easily have dire consequences for the Brit. The die may effectively be cast. Should that happen, Norris would find himself in an uncomfortable position that he's yet to experience ever in his Formula 1 career. That would be a bitter pill, and likely a huge blow to his self-belief, and it could have lasting ramifications on his relationship with McLaren that he's been loyal to since 2017. Now, I know you might be arguing, well, what about 2019? He was the number 2 driver to Carlos Sainz. Well, that was his rookie year, to be fair. There weren't really major expectations. McLaren were bringing in Carlos to lead the team specifically. But then in 2020, we saw it became a lot more equal. Things changed. But at least what McLaren's saying right now, it does leave the door open for Norris to change the narrative and him having some control again. That maybe Stella is treating his drivers like grown-ups who can handle the truth. He's effectively saying to Norris, we believe you're capable of fighting this out, so go prove it. Otherwise, don't be surprised when we make the call. In a way, this could empower Norris. He knows exactly what is expected of him and what is at stake. The message is clear. Beat Piastri, and we will back you. Yes, it's indeed a pressure cooker environment, even though McLaren has the best car at the moment, but champions are made in such conditions. Look at Mercedes 2016 with Nico Rosberg. The team is understandably balancing a very precarious situation. As many people would say, it's a bit of a champagne problem, that they have 2 drivers that could go easily to win the championship, and they're doing their best to make sure that not one of them tips the scales and means the other one suddenly just goes bah! All the while fending off Verstappen's Red Bull and a looming technical clampdown. McLaren's priority is unmistakable. Win the war, even if it means a few battles get messy. The team have not just held firm, but reinforced the notion that individual ambitions are not welcome at McLaren. For Lando, this is a moment of truth. He is still a future world champion because he proved he was capable of some sort of fight back last year. And I imagine that if Max Verstappen hadn't had that comfortable cushion at the beginning of the year, it would have been a lot closer. Lando said himself that being 50 plus points behind Verstappen by the time he got to Miami, that didn't help. And it actually makes you wonder that Oscar, he had to come back from adversity after Melbourne. He was 23 points behind Norris, and had he lost any more points, there would have been a clear gap, a whole win in Lando's pocket for him to lose and still be ahead of the championship regarding his teammate. It was so close to Oscar losing it at the first round, but then he clawed it back and got past. So therefore, Lando's challenge, it's not small fry. So it means Lando can either find another gear and rise to meet the challenge, restoring his confidence, outpacing the calm assassin in the sister car, or he can watch as the team with some regret, but even more resolve, back Piastri and leave Norris in an unfamiliar supporting role. The clock is ticking. But McLaren isn't just giving Lando a warning, they are giving him motivation. They still believe he can do it, but they are having to just show him the reality that we are in a position where we know that Red Bull will give Max everything possible, that Yuki Tsunoda is right there to help him in Q3 to try and claw back a couple of positions on the grid, maybe even take away pole on occasion, so we need you too, especially you Lando, to raise your A game to A+ standard. But McLaren will do anything to hold on to the Constructors' title and get the Drivers' title, do the double. Whether it means that a few noses are put out of joint in the case of Oscar or Lando, so be it. They're prepared to take it. Win first, apologise later. And Norris and Piastri, they've really got no choice but to dance this dance, sing this particular tune, because this car is the best car, no matter what Lando says. It just is. Because if either one of the drivers starts to rebel and push back against the team, then I firmly believe that McLaren will actually call their bluff and just go, well, if you don't like it, look, the door's right here. Like how the door might be right there for Sergio Perez's return to F1, which the Mexican GP's extension might prove to still be ajar. To find out more about these rumours and Cadillac's big party this weekend at the Miami Grand Prix, Watch this video next, straight after this one.